So hi Mark.
Hi.
Everybody, this is my friend Mark.
Hello.
Mark Skelding. Mark, you are trained in psychosynthesis psychotherapy.
Yes, I've got a diploma in that.
And you do counselling every day. And also, you were the founding convener of Transition Towns in this beautiful town of Thames.
Exactly. Yes.
It's great to be talking with you today.
Thank you very much, and you too.
So
it's always fun to talk with you.
Always a fun time having a chat with Lucy.
In fact, isn't that what this is called? Having a chat with Lucy?
Should be.
With this series.
That's what I'm going to call it, having a chat with Lucy. Longform.
Yeah.
Okay, so one of the things I was really interested to talk about, so Mark has been working on Extinction Rebellion here in New Zealand as well as part of the team here in Thames. But we always tend to gravitate towards conversations around social change and well-being, and that was sort of what I want to talk with you about today. Because one of the things I've noticed as I've got back into climate change campaigning, so I used to do it as my job in the UK, and then I've taken 5 years off to just live the change, and we've gone off grid and everything. And then in the last couple of months, really since the release of all the IPCC reports that really I think brought the information about where things were really at into the mainstream, didn't it? And it was like this wave of consciousness, and that hit me as well, that wave. It was like boom, and I immediately knew I had to get started again. But since doing that, since putting my do you say wheel to the grind or grind to the wheel?
I think you put your shoulder to the wheel.
Shoulder to the wheel.
Or you can put your axe to the grindstone.
Axe to the grind.
Yeah,
okay, this is the story of my life. I miss out the tool or the body limb, you know, the limb.
Well, don't we all? And this is about embodiment and being an embodied part of the whole thing.
Okay.
And that's what I'm particularly interested in.
Awesome. Okay, so yeah, what a great introduction.
Yeah, I think you were brilliant.
Forgetting the shoulder onto the grind.
You need a clapper.
I do, I really do. Okay, my shoulder to the wheel, my axe to the grind, you know, all of those things. What I have found is that it's overwhelming. And I actually wonder if coming into our consciousness as a society, we need new vocabulary, like things like climate grief, and you know, some of those words to describe how sad you can feel when you think about everything we have lost already and everything we're due to lose. Even if we completely change the game right now, in 2019 we're still going to lose several species.
Well, we're already well into the 6th greatest extinction. So we're losing more species than we have in the last 55 million years. So this is kind of big.
Yeah, it's big. And, you know, I'll just find myself having a conversation with someone and I'll start crying as I just think about it. Or I'll just be alone thinking about it, and, you know, my chest will seize up and my stomach will turn into knots and I'll find myself crying, because I am grieving. The knowledge of the state of things has made me grieve. But you know, my work is sort of in wellness and I want to be a joyful person, and so the conversation I want to have is around how we cope with this grieving, you know.
Well, you see, I think we're in a process of reimagining humanity. And that means obviously reimagining ourselves and our place in it. So the grief is entirely predictable and understandable, is a better word than predictable, and natural, because the blinkers around our identity are being stripped away really, really quickly, and we are being brought at a massive speed up to a recognition that everything that we've relied upon has been false or limited. It kind of works within a particular box, but we're discovering the box is much bigger. So there's something about the experience that many people have had. For example, those people who've broken up who've grown up in a situation where the parents may have broken up or something, or even though where that hasn't happened, where you reach that age and you suddenly realize that things are not actually as they've been presented to you. So there's that whole time, and I think everybody's had that kind of experience in their childhood when they suddenly go, oh fuck, so everything I thought isn't true. And obviously within a family situation that can be hugely distressing, particularly if it's sort of if the parents or caregivers are realizing that for themselves at another level and thinking, well, actually we're finished with this, we'll have to go and find another way through. So I think a lot of the grief is that the information we're getting is challenging our sense of who we are at a really profound level. And this is something that a lot of kind of contemporary biology, and I'm thinking of people like Andreas Weber, Catherine Pale, and those kind of people are exploring as they realize that to be alive is to be aware that you're alive, no matter, even if you're a single cell. And you're aware of your environment, so there's always relationship, and the experience of how I am in that relationship and what's going on, whether I want to move towards this, just be still, or move apart, is fundamental to the experience of living, even in a single cell. So that's not an automatic thing to do with chemistry, although chemistry is involved, but that there is a sense of being at that very level, and a sense of connecting with things that are good. And then you multiply that by, I can't remember right now how many cells there are in your body.
I make numbers up sometimes.
You didn't hear that. Everything you hear is completely researched to the nth degree, I'm sure, in conversations with Lucy. So all of those cells are doing that. And there's a notion of our sense of ourself is actually how we manage all of that. And that's connected to the cells around us, so there's a knowing of where we are. So the grief is sure, it's a shock at all the losses that are going on. Of course it is. But the very system is in pain. Because we're impacting upon it. And it's letting us know that. And the information is that the way we live and the way we understand and the way we imagine ourselves doesn't really fit. So one of the things that these theoreticians are doing is that they're looking at Darwinian idea, which, as we know, is survival of the fittest, and turning that completely around. They're saying actually creativity in life is ultimately full of imagination, and anything that is possible will be allowed. So you get these birds with these incredible tail feathers, or and people say, well, that's really there to demonstrate that the male of the species is so incredibly competent it can carry all its dead weight. Well, it may be carrying all its dead weight, but it may just be that it can. And that argument certainly doesn't hold for, say, the amazing patterns inside a shell, which is 20,000 feet under the sea and never seen by anything.
Totally.
So this is, that this rethinking is about that we actually live in this incredibly creative, imagination-rich world. And everything that can be included will be, and that which can't be will be let go of. And what we have done by letting go of our connection and interrelationship with that vibrant creative world, and seeing it only as a resource to be drawn from, and not a resource to be contributed to and participated in, is we're increasingly putting ourselves to being unsustainable is the word that we talk about the way we live, but actually we are unsustainable within the system. It's so living sustainably is actually about how we re-enter and engage with that creative process that's all around us. So that's a kind of reimagining ourselves.
So in a way, that the grief that I've described is three things, or it's probably more, but three that we've identified just now. So it's one, a sadness, just a sort of basic sadness to think of everything we've lost. But then two, it's a shaking of our fundamental identity, which in our bones, we know that we are a part of this community of living things. And now in our bones, we know that we are not doing a good job of being in that community of living things. And then three, it's also that community of living things feeding back to us.
It's exactly that.
Okay.
It's the feedback. You know, if we think we live in you know, we talk about being interconnected, and then there's the whole systems theory. Well, and it's such an attractive intellectual idea. So a lot of us are going, oh yeah, that sounds great. But when you actually take that on board, it's like, okay, so it's not just an idea. If I'm part of it, every part of me is part of it. Mm-hmm. So how does this show up? You know, what's the feedback happening? How am I experiencing that in my body? So of course we've got this extraordinary explosion of all kinds of illness and things. Mm-hmm. You know, and we can look at them in a linear cause and effect way and say, you know, it's about environmental pollution and all those things, which it undoubtedly is. And then we can look at it and say, what's the feedback here? The feedback here is that the system is sick, mm-hmm. and it shows up out there, and it shows up in here. Mm-hmm. This is actually the same illness.
Yeah. So in a way, the grief is a really beautiful thing, because it shows us at least that we are able to hear and from nature around us, or it shows us that there are still this tentative consciousness.
Yeah,
you know
we may have politically and economically and intellectually and even spiritually chosen to set ourselves up as if we're cut off.
Cut it off, yeah.
But we can do that all we like.
Yeah.
You know, it's like when you decide to have nothing more to do with the rest of your family for some reason, because whatever happened, you can say, well, you know, they're dead to me and I'm no longer part of them. Well, it's fine, but the reality is that you nevertheless are still part of that. You
carry their DNA.
You carry their DNA, your very being, moment by moment. Every time you think, what a bunch of whatever, I'm not part of it, is being shaped by that because you are part of it.
Yeah.
You know, so we can never not be connected, even if we behave as if we are. So, I mean, I think when, you know, there's a level at which you can say grief is a very beautiful thing. But when you're grieving, it's really painful, mm-hmm. and sore, and it's really hard, and you know, I mean, none of us know what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. And I look at your gorgeous kids, mm-hmm. and other people's gorgeous kids, and I think, gosh, you know, how's it going to go? Yeah. Because by the set of values that we've all grown up with and have come into different ways of relating with, and you're off grid, and whatever, and you know, however we're doing, we're still responding to that ethos, mm-hmm. more than any other, and what we know is that ethos is what they use, functionally extinct. You know, that's what they use with for a long time, the Karoo here in New Zealand, Aotearoa New Zealand, that is. For your international audience, was considered functionally extinct in that numbers were declining faster than young was being raised. Mm-hmm. Even though at that time there were still tens of thousands of these birds around, they weren't particularly uncommon. Yeah. But their replacement rate wasn't keeping up with their disappearance. I believe that's actually changed. Mm-hmm. However, currently, I think you can make a reasonably good argument that the way we're living now, certainly the way of life, is functionally extinct. Yeah,
absolutely.
Which is a fascinating thing to be aware of and part of, really. You know, we really need to notice the incredible gifts of this somewhat dysfunctional 4,000-year westernized civilization, and learn and notice what is valuable and what is useful about it, and treasure that so that we can move into the next phase of whatever without losing the richness and the beauty, which is slightly different to saying that we move into the next phase without losing, I don't know, electricity or whatever it happens to be.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that has happened for me is that, you know, I get hit by these waves of grief, but I also feel equally hit by waves of sweetness in nature. So in the last couple of months, you know, like hearing the cicadas here, the kihi-kihi, and hearing the bird song feels heaps more tender and joy-filled for me. Like, so it's almost as if a layer of my skin has been stripped off, and I'm just more rawly open to the joy around me in nature as well. Have you read The Prophet by
Khalil Gibran?
Yeah, so in there they talk about grief actually carving out space for joy, and I sort of feel like a little bit of that is happening as well, and can happen.
Some of the writers I was mentioning before, basically they're saying that feelings are the driving force of life and aliveness, and therefore, if complexity happens when things tend to join up and increase the potentiality of the individual, so then you get two. So there's more possibilities with two than one, and so on and so on. Then what we have names for has a kind of corollary or a resonance right the way down to the lowest level, and it turns up everywhere. So when you talk about joy, or for that matter sadness, I mean, like here, we're sitting here, we can hold that experience, which is a qualitative experience of being. You know, there's a visceral sense when you know the difference between being sad and happy, because you feel different.
Yeah.
So when you connect to what that feels like, one of the lovely things that a lovely exercise that I do almost constantly, or try to do, is to look at the environment around me and to see what I'm seeing. So what are the qualities that I might want to increase in myself at the moment? You know, is it strength when we're talking about these issues, or the ability to be flexible? Well, I look out here at these gum trees, and I can see, you know, the strength of the trunk, and the incredible flexibility and softness in the leaves and the little branches that hold them. And I can be reminded of what that feels like. I don't know what a tree feels like, but no way of being able to put words to that, but I know what I feel like when I experience those qualities, and I can see them being mirrored to me by a tree. So this is a gateway into myself, and the tree just maybe able to know something about me in whatever way trees know stuff. Which makes walking in the bush a completely different experience.
Yeah, so this exercise, so you know, people are sometimes like, I'm so inspired by the oak tree, you know, and it's a little bit glib perhaps, but this exercise is about spending time reflecting on what you're seeing in nature.
Well, with, you know, often with a client of mine, you know, who is I'm doing this a bit more. I'm doing this much more than I used to, because I used to feel a little bit shy about it, to be honest.
Yeah.
I think, oh, they're looking like you, some kind of weirdo. You know, because a lot of, not everyone by any means, but particularly chaps who come to see people like me are often quite mentally identified. You know, they think a lot, and they may not have a lot of emotion. This is certainly not true for everyone by a long chalk, but particularly in men, I think, you might disagree with this, and certainly some people, but I don't want to be too gendered about this, but there's this idea that, you know, men are to be even further from their emotions than women. You know, so often in a family kind of setting, you know, the women have the added burden of having to feel for everybody, which is incredibly unfair. Anyway, but I'll often ask people, you know, so you think I should think so and so and so and so, or you think I should be more. Yes, but how are you going to be more? So you think I should be more flexible and accepting around my kids? Well, I'll just have to think about it and be, you know, really, this idea of somehow grabbing ourselves and being more so and so. And obviously one can do that, but it's quite I don't know how we can sustain that. So I'll say, well, that's great. You know, what is the particular quality of that when you're doing that? Oh, well, I feel more when I do that. I feel much more open to them, and I can enjoy how they play, and you know, I can enjoy their curiosity and their wonder. So we're talking about joy, we're talking about curiosity, we're talking about wonder. Yeah. So how about you take your curiosity and wonder and walk around in your environment, go to walk in the park. Like, how do these things show up? How does enjoyment show up just now? You know, what is it that you look at that you think, oh, I think that bird is really enjoying itself. It's just tweetering away. Why would it be doing that? You know, obviously it's trying to attract a mate. Good Darwinian. So maybe it's just having a good time on this warm afternoon. Oh wow. It's lovely, it's a tui. Yeah, so starting to live as if our emotional palette is contiguous with our environment, and then it's not a huge step to begin to imagine that our intellect is contiguous and our intelligence is contiguous with the planetary intelligence, and that our mind, it's a bit Khalil Gibran-ish, your mind is not your mind, but that mind is not stuck in here looking out, but we have the tool, just as lungs pick up on the oxygen in the air and engage with that, and the process of breathing draws something in and gives something back that is used by everything else. What if the process of thinking is, if we start to imagine that we are formulating thoughts as part of an evolving planetary system?
Yeah.
So the thoughts that we think can be tempered and considered in that much bigger context, rather than just in the lonely isolation of myself alone.
Yeah.
Which I can do as well.
Yeah.
You know, this is the confusing thing, is that we can take ourselves away and be, in the very best as well as worst sense of it, self-serving and self-soothing and self-contained and self-realizing. But then we can self-realize and self-soothe and self-contain and self-serve when we also include a notion of self that is much bigger than ourselves as an individual, that includes everything.
That particular note about you know, we don't have a full sense of ourselves if our sense of ourselves isn't related to nature, do we? Because we're born to be a part of nature.
Well, we're never not a part of nature.
But if we don't see ourselves as that, then we don't have a true sense of who we are.
Well, it makes it very, well, I don't think we can realise our full potential.
Yeah.
On behalf of ourselves and everything around us.
So, just on the crick in my neck.
Oh, righto.
No, just kidding.
Include it.
Okay, Mark's just gonna diagnose the crick in my neck because for the last, it's been about 15 days. I've woken up every morning with a crick in my neck and it's really sore, and it did get worse when I did the slip and slide at unschooling camp.
Right.
Because I got whiplash. It was
Right.
an intense experience. But actually, it's just a crick in my neck.
Exactly. It is just a crick in your neck and you've got whiplash from the slide.
But it started before the whiplash.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It started 15 days ago.
Okay, did climate change cause the crick in my neck?
Of course it didn't. Of course it didn't. Climate change is a symptom of an economic and political system and psychological system that doesn't work. You know, climate change is not, I mean, it's problematic, but climate change isn't the problem. Climate change is simply a symptom
Yeah.
of a problem that
Of our sick society.
that we are we contributed to,
Yeah.
and the distresses that we feel ourselves. I mean, I've got no idea what the crick in your neck is. I mean, we could make up all kinds of stories. You could just have a really crunky pillow. It could be your pillow.
Yeah.
You know, and I facetiously could say maybe the pillow that you've got has been, you know, improperly manufactured so that it can be produced for the cheapest possible way on a huge scale, which would be to blame the kind of industrial complex somewhat. It could be that you bought your pillow second-hand because you're a committed person to recycle and reduce, and actually the pillow that you've bought is past its useful date because the substances of which it's made haven't been made to last for 50 years. And in fact, your own commitment to being a wonderful source and inspiration of change has resulted in you having a crick in your neck.
Actually, it's another thing. Because
this is
what
why we do this. You see, now you've got an answer.
I've got the answer
This is
because
yours.
I'm reading so much
Uh-huh.
and I'm not sleeping at night because I'm having lots of really great ideas
About the bubbles.
about social change and protests and tactics. So I'm waking up every night pretty much at 3 o'clock on the dot. What is up with that? That's so crazy how that happens. So
You have a bladder?
3 o'clock, don't need the loo.
No.
Don't need the loo at all.
Okay.
But at 3 o'clock, wake up, cha-ching, great idea, write that one down. And then I read for pretty much 2 hours every night between 3 and 5.
Sitting in your bed.
Exactly.
Oh, there we are.
Sitting in my bed because I got my arm around Juno, I got my one book like this, and I'm like that.
Yep.
And so pretty much that's what is happening. Which leads me, it's a beautiful segue to my next question really, which is about how do we be sustainable activists? How do we, because obviously that's no way to not burn out. Reading and having great ideas all night, you know, as well as doing all the stuff you were doing before you started climate change activism this time round. You know, so how do we, what's a good mental space to get into when you're really passionate about doing what you can to really prevent the worst of the climate catastrophe or the climate crisis? So we'll have to assume a few things, I guess. You know, those assumptions are the people I'm talking to who are interested in this want to work towards, you know, stopping the worst of climate crisis. They're going to do that through activism, but they want to be sustainable. So how do we do that? Because that to me feels, you know, a lot of people, a lot of great activists I know can't get involved with Extinction Rebellion because they're already burnt out. So we just can't keep burning out. They're calling us the burnout generation. Have you heard that phrase?
I have, yeah. I have, but...
How does the burnout generation...
But hang on, why wouldn't we be a burnout generation? Look at what happens in California and halfway around the world. You know, the planet is burning out.
Yeah.
So naturally that's going to show up in us in some way, shape or form. And if we're going to deal with it out there, we also have to deal with it. You know, the inner and the outer of the mirrors of one another. So, I mean, I think one of the things that is, you know, for years I've banged on about, you know, I don't have a great deal of time for hope. And I always felt really uncomfortable about it, but more and more I've been noticing people saying, oh yeah, well, hope.
The Extinction Rebellion kind of motto is hope dies, action begins.
Yeah, right. Well, I was at a there's a fantastic thing up the Kauranga Valley actually. Ooh, would be getting on 10 or 12 years ago, and we had a Heart Politics up there, and Finn came along. Finn McElsey came along and was doing some John and Macy work with us all, which was great. And if you're out there, Finn, good to catch up. And we did this thing with these different places where you stand in, you know, do I stand in hope? Do I stand in despair? What do I stand in? And we were all doing that. And everybody wanted to end up in hope. It's this funny little sort of thing as everybody stood up and they said, well, I've been in here and I've been in angry. Now I'm in hope. And I was thinking, well, fuck, you know. Hope schmope, really.
Hope on a rope.
Hope on a rope, and of course people were really shocked about that, and I was a bit confused too. And it's only been in the last few months that I've realised that for me, trust is a much more powerful and holding experience. So I've got no idea about how things are going to end up, and I do have grave concerns for, you know, when you hear even people like James Renwick, the New Zealand climate scientist, sort of chatting, and he was saying at a group I was at something along the lines of, well, you know, in the bar at the IPCC, when they're not grappling over whether a report is going to be welcomed or simply acknowledged, even in the best case, they're kind of thinking, well, you know, we're going to end up with about 2 billion less people at the very minimum on the planet. And some of these people will be people either that we know now or are related to people that we know now. Yeah. You know, there's no real doubt about that. Which is awful.
It's awful.
What a terrible thing. And yet, so that's a terribly hopeless thing to say. And I just have to, and I think we all have to trust that we are part of a much bigger story than we possibly imagine. It goes back at least 14 billion years now, close enough, and it isn't going to stop. Well, the big story isn't going to stop. Whether it stops here, I don't know. I find it very hard to believe that anything that we could do unless we unleashed an enormous nuclear war or something similar is actually going to stop at least a couple of cockroaches reproducing and starting the whole thing again. And I don't think it needs to be that bad. Mainly because I can't imagine that. But what I can imagine is that we reimagine our place in it, which has happened so many times through through human history. Really, it's happened within our lifetimes. Not particularly intentionally or consciously, but you know, when you were talking before about 7 years ago, it was hard to imagine that everybody you knew would have a cell phone. If we just push that back, you know, the digital revolution since what, the 80s, we imagine ourselves as human beings quite differently now than we did in 1975. And we take it quite for granted, and we've barely noticed the transition. So we unconsciously or inadvertently reimagine ourselves all the time. I think what's really fascinating about being a piece of self-reflective consciousness on an intelligent planet is that the feedback is saying now is the time to reimagine ourselves deliberately and intentionally, taking everything into account. And that, I find that extremely exciting.
Yeah.
Hugely challenging for mainstream anything, mainstream psychology, mainstream economics, you name it, mainstream ecology, mainstream biology. But yeah, that's the, I guess that's the rebellion part of it. How do we keep ourselves from burning out? Is partly through trust, and trusting that it's okay to let go for an hour or two. It's okay to sleep through the night. It's okay to snuggle down with the family and just, wake up at 3 in the morning and think, oh yeah, I will remember enough, because I'm not on my own. There's lots of us doing this, and between us, you were saying that the bubbles joke before was that Lucy was saying before the camera came on that part of her dreaming process had been to imagine this whole wall of bubbles and this great defence of bubbles, and then woke up this morning and thought, well, that's not going to work, is it?
A barricade, a la French Revolution, but made out of giant bubbles.
Yeah, I think there's something in this actually in terms of ourselves as a bubble. But anyway, the right imagination will happen collectively. You or me or anybody doesn't have to save whatever it is that appears to need saving. We just need to trust that we will do this together, not to become complacent in that, not to stop working towards it, but to being open to the feedback from our systems, from our friends and social groups and so on, as well as the bigger system which is really shaking us by the shoulders and asking us to wake up and join the party. Climate change is a terrible failure of human imagination, and also an unaccountable reluctance to join the best party of all.
Yeah. Yeah. So I get the impression that you long gave up hope. You've been through grief, and now you also see some opportunities as well. Like there is a little bit of curiosity or something about the future for you. Like you're anticipating something good can happen.
Well, I'm one of those people who has, the great sadness that we don't have kids, Trish and I. So I think it's really different for people with kids. There are many children in our lives who we love hugely.
Yeah.
And yet I'm pretty sure that it's still different. That there's that kind of that biological connection. So, it's easy to sound incredibly glib about opportunity and all that stuff, because it's far from certain, and I'm sure it's going to, and change can be really challenging. It doesn't have to be, but it can be. And of course, change on this scale at this kind of rate that we're looking into means practicing a whole lot of communication skills that we've really been quite determined to ignore for a long time, and acceptance and having patience and again coming back to trust, and trusting the process, and as my friend and the great teacher from Taranaki, Vivian Hutchinson, would say, most important thing to do is to keep turning up, and we have to keep showing up in whatever way. You were generous enough to sort of say that I was part of the Extinction Rebellion sort of thing here in terms, and I just go to the meetings really, and there was a meeting last night, and we got there. There were some people there who were under 30. It was wonderful. It's great because finding helping that generation of people. Right, there are some fantastically young activists around, of course, But I think that generation, you were talking as being the burnout generation. There's a whole generation that's been abandoned to screens, and I can't think of a worse place to be abandoned to, really. It's like all those kind of films of 1984 when I was young. They'd have lots of screens everywhere. And now we have them in our hands.
Yeah, but it will be a part of the rebellion,
Oh, totally.
That social media is going to be where the war is sort of fought, and if we're putting energy into something, it is going to be important, and it's going to be that generation who...
I'm not knocking the screens.
No.
I'm knocking the abandonment.
Yeah, totally.
That's what I think, what we have in the internet is it's this massive neural network to enable a global intelligence on an unprecedented scale that takes it out of the kind of only the visceral, and brings it into, it's how do we translate our connectedness to the eucalyptus trees or whatever it happens to be. How do we translate the feedback that we experience as individuals into something that we collectively can respond to?
Yeah. And
do it on a massive scale? Well, we can only do that through things like the internet.
So things, like our friend runs bush skills up in the forest here, and he teaches little kids, survival skills like how to, hunt and fish and skin things and stuff like that. But if we were to have some survival skills for like this next phase of life, of consciousness, during this climate catastrophe that we're heading into, what are some of the skills that you think we could be kind of working on? You mentioned communication, like really coming to the party with our communication skills and talking about feelings being really important.
Well, and it's how we teach ourselves and one another, and obviously especially our kids. Not so much we don't have to teach the kids, because they're already doing it. They're primed to some wonderful research stuff about children that are literally minutes old. And I've never been in that situation to check this out, but you may have done. That an infant just a few minutes old will respond to the facial expressions that someone is giving to it. And obviously, as a mum, you're probably going, the kid's probably, So these experiments, they had researchers in there who are doing other expressions, sort of, kind of making faces, and the children will respond. And that implies that they know something about the fact that they're in there and you're out there and you're doing something with your face, and they can do it too.
Yeah.
It's not random, anyway, so that's about communication. So it's about not blocking our kids and our own connectedness to our place and our environment when and listening to what they're having to say and what we're having to say and what we feel as being part of the feedback from the wider system, filtered through our own filters, which includes our own particular, any damage that we ourselves may have encountered in our own growing up, so wherever, if we've had some sort of terrible experience or difficult experience, and we've had to exercise and develop some particular coping mechanisms to deal with them, then from our own life, then when we get input from the wider system, the challenge or difficulties being experienced, we are more likely to say, oh, there's that information, and I'll respond to that with an experience that when I learned how to do this. So a mainstream psychological approach will go, so you're recreating the trauma you had with your mother, Lucy. I see. But whereas very rarely will your counsellor or therapist or psychologist say, oh, so you're having this experience. How does that relate to what, you know, yes, this is your unique experience and it is precious and special and really important to you. And how do you think some of the experiences that are going on in the wider world, even down, you know, you do it yourself in a minor way, the crick in your neck is a direct response to your concern about, you know, the planetary crisis, which you are feeling in a certain way and are responding to by reading books in the middle of the night when you should be dozing off. So, you know,
yeah.
So I think it is all about communication and being part of the you know, Indra's net, the Hindus call it, and understanding that we're a node, a human node in this living universe.
Yeah.
And how do we do that? And what does it? And that has a feeling attached to it, and affirming, and being really curious about that with each other.
Yeah.
That, I think, is one of the most important tools that we can have, and being able to say, okay, you know, enough is enough. We have to stop. Not that we don't need to have too much blame. I mean, I do get so angry about being lied to.
Yeah.
You know, so I can get quite exercised about, you know, when you read about ExxonMobil spending all that time.
Yeah.
And you wonder why it was that people have been warning US presidents at least since 1961, when there's, you know, they were talking to John F. Kennedy about climate change, and you think, well,
yeah,
all of that stuff, you know, I could get quite exercised and excited about that, and I think, well, okay, it's a shame we didn't, you know, that we decided collectively somehow that President Carter was a bit of a Fruit Loop and threw out all his innovations in the 70s for our American listeners. But so we needed to be at this point to really take on board self-reflection. You know, anything we had done then might have been for us and only for us.
Yeah.
Whereas we don't have that luxury anymore. You know, if we're going to come through this, or how we come through this, will be dependent upon how for the whole we can be.
Yeah.
And that's kind of cool.
That is kind of cool.
So that's, I think the other skills are things like poetry. Poetry is a really, really important, an important tool. You know, maybe next time you're awake in the middle of the night, write a poem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've been writing heaps of poems.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Write poetry. Because we put words together differently in poetry, and we resonate differently. You can do impossible things in a poem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've always had a general sense that, you know, we need the arts for this, to get us through this, and we need stories to get us through this. But yeah, that's a really lovely, specific point about poetry. Write more poems.
Write more poems.
Thanks.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
That's been Mark. Long Conversations with Lucy.
Aye.
Came up with a name for the series.
That's very nice.
Cool. Do you ever watch my YouTube videos?
I have, but I haven't watched them for ages.
Do you know how I sign off?
No.
I say stay radical.
All right.
So you can say that if you want.
Okay.
Just only if you want to.
Oh, go on then. We could say it together.
Okay.
Stay radical.